Good morning. We're looking at the Roman Republic lecture notes for this week. So I know most of you were in class for this, but I know some of you might not have been, or you may not have been feeling all that well. So I am going to go through all of the notes again. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to text message me or to email me. So we're going to start off with the Roman Republic. So where we last left off, the Greek Empire had fallen and the Macedonians had taken over, and eventually the Roman Republic takes over from the Macedonians. And of course the Macedonians were part of the Greek culture. So let's look at the geography of Italy. You're going to notice, as I talked about in class, that you don't have the kind of mountainous regions that you did in Greece. And so this allows for more of a holistic or a full space instead of the regions or the city-states that you saw with Greece. There's a lot more farmland. Italy is a wonderfully fertile area, and as such, there's a wonderful agricultural system there, and that existed even as far back as the time of the Romans. Rome itself is located about 18 miles inland, so it's right here. It's built around the seven hills of the Palatine, and so it's easily defended. So all you have to do is make sure your hills have soldiers and you can pretty much see everything coming towards you, and that's essentially why Rome lasted as long as it did. You'll also notice that it is situated on the Tiber River. You have the Mediterranean Sea, the Adriatic Sea, the Ionian Sea, Ligurian Sea, the Tyrrhenian Sea. So we're looking at a lot of waterways, the river that goes through it, and then you have the River Po through the north of Italy. These are all reminiscent of, if you think back to Mesopotamia with the Tigris and Euphrates River, and in Egypt with the Nile. This is how civilization emerges. So let's talk about how Rome was founded. So when you go to Italy and you wander around, there are a bazillion, and I mean truly a bazillion, representations of these two little babies. This is the myth of the founding of Rome. So supposedly it was founded by Romulus, but before that, Romulus and Remus were twins. Their parents were a Vestal Virgin and Mars, who was the god of war. They were abandoned by their mother's brother and left to die next to the Tiber River. They are found and raised by a she-wolf, and that's the she-wolf. Oh, such a nice little puppy. And of course, as they get older, they argue, as all brothers tend to do, and Romulus kills Remus and then founds Rome. As I mentioned in class, you're going to see some of these myths overlapping with the more well-known myths of Christianity, or, and if you believe that this is what happened with Christianity, that's fine, but there's certain things that you see: a flood, the Garden of Eden, two brothers who argue and one kills the other, and that's reminiscent of Cain and Abel. So these legends all have a very similar concept through them throughout history. Now the reality is that Romulus and Remus didn't actually found Rome. The Etruscans did. Now the Etruscans came from a little bit north of Rome. Before the Etruscans got settled in the Roman area, the Greeks had colonized southern Italy around 750 BCE. Then the Etruscans came down from the north and settled the area that became Rome. The Etruscans urbanized what became Rome around 575 BCE. When we think of urbanization, we think of all of those things that are representative of a society. They start stockpiling food. They have very specific religious practices. They develop art and culture. They begin to write things down. And as such, this is where Rome emerges. By 550 BCE, the Etruscans controlled most of modern-day Italy, but as all things happen, as they rise, they fall, and by 480 BCE, their power began to decline. And by 400, the Etruscans had pretty much resumed their little area up to the north of Rome and were not heard from again in historical terms. But what the Etruscans did is they set up the towns and cities through northern and central Italy that became the life breath of Rome. And for a civilization to have a really good chance of surviving, they need a good bureaucracy. This good bureaucracy came from the Etruscans in this particular situation. So, Rome and the Republic of Rome. It was built in 3 stages. First, we have the conquest of Italy. Second, we have our Punic Wars, which was the conflict with Carthage. Carthage is down here. And you'll see with the specific geography that Italy, in and of itself, was quite the area in the midst of everything. So you have Carthage, you have Macedonia and Greece, you have Egypt, Syria is over here, Gaul, which became France, and Spain. So it's really the center of the universe in some sense when you think back to about 2,500 years ago. Last and not least was the involvement with and domination of Greece, because Greece had been, up to that point, the dominating civilization. So, let's talk about what happens first. First, we overthrow the Etruscans, and the Roman leaders started a policy of security. They wanted to ensure that their borders were as safe and secure as possible. And the only way they could really do that was to ensure that their neighbors would never lay siege against them, would never pick a fight with them. So what they basically did was they went in and they took over all of their neighbors. And this happened for the next 200 years. And ostensibly, what they were trying to do is ensure the safety of their borders by invading and taking over their neighbors. But keep in mind, every time you invade, take over a neighbor, now you have new neighbors. So as you're going to see over the next couple hundred years, Rome goes from, a small city area in Italy to Italy, and then way beyond Italy as it dominates the entire area. By 264 BCE, Rome has held dominance over the entire Italian peninsula. Historians call this opportunistic expansion, and this is one of the most important elements of understanding the expansion of the Roman Republic. And when we get to the Roman Empire, that'll be different. But for the Roman Republic, their entire motivation was to maintain security levels. The Romans were very smart about being fair and diplomatic, and part of that meant extending citizenship to the people they conquered. They allowed the allies to run their towns and cities as they wanted to. They were independent. All they had to do was send tax money and soldiers to Rome. And that's not a bad deal, because a lot of other invaders come in and they burn everything to the ground. Now, that's not to say that if you show up to the Roman Republic and you say, I am not going to allow you to take over my town or city, and I don't care what you do, we are never subjugating ourselves to the Romans. Well, in that case, they would kill you, and they would kill all of you. That is how you get a dominating reputation, is for being merciless. Now, as the Roman Republic coalesces and becomes very significant, they did a few things to keep their conquered people integrated into society. People who spoke Latin were given full Roman citizenship, and that is a big deal. It's like getting American citizenship today. It is the land of opportunity for most of the world back 2,500 years ago. The remaining people, the non-Latin speakers, were made allies. They were free to run their own affairs, but had to provide Rome with soldiers. So again, the Romans had a very smart way of doing things. You're nice to us, we treat you well, I scratch your back, you scratch my back, everybody's happy. As soon as somebody says, nope, I don't want to play this game, they're done. Now the Romans needed to build their republic. And one of the most important things that you can do in any civilization is build the infrastructure. Infrastructure in general means roads, bridges, government buildings, hospitals, schools, things like that. Italy, or the Romans, started with building roads. And these roads were vitally important because it allowed for quick communication and it allowed for easy military movement throughout the countries. This was a revolution. And if you go to Italy today, you can see where the roads ran north to south and east to west. One of the most important roads, which was a north to south, was built around this time period. It's called the Appian Way, and it runs from Rome to Brindisi, which is in the south, in the heel, right there. And this allowed easy movement. And again, you cannot underestimate the value of these kind of roads. Think about the United States and the interstate system that we have. It is how transportation has defined this country. Now, allies, these are the non-Latin speakers, could improve their status and even become citizens through expressing loyalty. And loyalty is so vital in terms of the sense of building that civilization. So let's talk about the Punic Wars. In 264 BCE, the biggest power in the area was Carthage, and this is in North Africa. So Carthage is here, and if you go off the map a little bit, you'll see Egypt. But Carthage is as close to Italy as you can get. This was a major trading route, which resulted in significant political and military power. So this was a very important city 2,500 years ago. They had expanded into southern Spain, and they expanded into Sicily. Again, this is Italy, this is Sicily, this is Carthage, this is Spain. And you'll see how close this is. Now remember, what did the Romans feel about securing their borders? Exactly. So this was clearly, at least from the Roman perspective, the generals of Carthage kind of throwing it out there that they want to dance, so to speak. So the presence of the Carthaginians in Sicily made Rome feel unsafe. And in 264 BCE, two cities in Sicily were in dispute. Rome intervened, which made the Carthaginians deemed a reason to go to war. And Rome had an excellent navy because, look, it's got water everywhere. Italy is a peninsula, so it had to have an excellent navy. And they eventually won the war in 241 BCE. Keeping in mind that in those days, wars lasted a long time. It took a long time to get messages to and from the leadership. It took a long time to fight a war because, you were constantly having to support the soldiers. But unlike today, where they would just do an airdrop from an airplane, they had to send all the supplies via ships, via foot soldiers, and as a consequence, you'll see wars in this era going on for a long time. The Second Punic War, which is the one that everybody's all excited about in terms of the historians of the world, came about because the Carthaginians realized that they needed to focus on a land battle to win against Rome. You can't fight the Romans in the sea. That's just crazy talk. So in 218 BCE, the Romans encouraged the Spanish to revolt against Carthage. And Hannibal, the great Carthage general, led the major strikes against the Roman Republic. And that's Hannibal. he did this using elephants. And this is why Hannibal is so famous. Hannibal came through Spain, so you go up through Spain and up into the Swiss Alps, up and over the Swiss Alps, and then came down to Rome. He started with 35,000 men and 6,000 horses and elephants. Because he had to go through the Swiss Alps, he lost a lot of those men and elephants, but he still kept going, and unfortunately, too many men died, and he couldn't really launch a successful campaign against Rome. However, historically, when you look at the historical record, the Romans considered Hannibal to be a great general, no matter how kind of silly this whole thing seems. But remember, the winner writes the history. And when the winner writes the history, they don't want to seem like they had no problem defeating the enemy. They want to make the enemy look like a worthy opponent. So a lot of historians today believe that Hannibal wasn't a great general, but the Romans inflated his reputation so that it would inflate how great the Romans were. And again, these elephants, this was the real deal. And so many of them died trying to get through the mountains, because elephants and mountains don't really go well together. So what happens at the end of the Second Punic War? The Romans fought Hannibal back to North Africa. In 202 BCE, the Romans decisively beat the Carthaginians at the Battle of Zama. And in the peace treaty, Carthage had to give Rome the whole country of Spain. So all of this becomes Roman. Woo! And here's another great picture of the elephant in battle against the Roman soldiers. The Third Punic War. So you would think at this point Carthage should have gotten the message, but they didn't. In 149 BCE, Carthage went to war with a Roman ally, and by this time Rome was very powerful. And in this Third Punic War, they completely destroyed Carthage by 146 BCE. They literally burned the city to the ground. There's nothing left. And the Romans called this a territory, so it now belonged to Rome, and they called it Africa. So the Punic Wars go. Now the Greeks. We have the Greeks to deal with. The Romans enabled the Greeks to continue ruling from 196 BCE to 148 BCE. In 148, Macedonia attempted to break away from the Roman presence, and as a punishment, they were made a Roman province. So essentially, anytime you rebelled against the Romans, they were just going to slap you down and take your stuff. The leader of the revolt, the city-state of Corinth, was destroyed to teach the Greeks a lesson. So, basically what it comes down to is, you play ball with us, you're going to have a great life, we're never going to bother you too much, you send us your tax money, you send us some soldiers, you're Roman, everybody's happy. As soon as you rebel against us, we're going to burn your city to the ground. And that worked for a very long time. So by 146 BCE, Rome pretty much owned the entire Mediterranean Sea area. But as much as the Greeks were taken out by the Romans, the Romans took all of the important Greek cultural aspects and adapted it into the Roman way of life. Military tactics, plays, art, philosophy, religion, and education in Rome were all based on the Greek ideals. Let's look at religion. So most Roman gods have a Greek version. So we have Zeus, the Greek god of the gods, and his equivalent was Jupiter. Aphrodite is the goddess of love in the ancient Greek society, and in the Roman society it was Venus. Ares was the Greek god of war, and as I mentioned, Mars is the Roman god of war. The Romans, and most civilizations up to this point, pretty much worship gods for very practical reasons. If you wanted a good harvest, you made certain sacrifices to the gods. The thought process being, if the gods were happy with you, they bestowed their favor upon you. If the gods were angry at you, what resulted was flood, famine, drought, whatever natural disaster could happen. And this was really a way for the common man who really didn't understand meteorology or anything that we understand today, the whole idea of science, to explain the unexplainable. Religion explained things that man at this time thought was magic. And part of this was the performance of ritual. So one of the big rituals were sacrificing. So in the springtime, you would sacrifice a ram or a lamb. You would, in some ancient cultures, and the Romans weren't really big on throwing virgins into volcanoes, but in some of the South American Mayan cultures, child sacrifice and virgin sacrifice were very important because, again, what you had to sacrifice had to be extremely valuable to the civilization. And, throwing in some old lady who's had 27 kids is not going to be as appealing to the gods as some nice young nubile virgin. Slavery was something else that the Romans took from the Greeks. When the Romans took over the Mediterranean, they sent huge numbers of slaves back to Rome. And these slaves were used in a variety of ways. They were used in households as house slaves, pouring the wine, serving dinner. You had builders. The more educated slaves, i.e. the Greeks, were used as tutors for their children and shop workers. It was estimated that during the Roman Republic, 20 to 30% of the population were slaves. So that's really 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3 were slaves, and that's a pretty significant number in terms of building the eventual empire. One of the important moments in the Roman Republic, which is very significant, and you kind of need to know as a student of Western civilization, is the situation with Spartacus. Throughout 135 to 71 BCE, there were a lot of uprisings by slaves who had been taken from Greece. And these uprisings were generally crushed through crucifixion. So if slaves rebelled or tried to escape, they were crucified. And if you look here at the picture, you'll see that the crucified men and women were lined against the main roads. So anybody walking up and down the main roads watched these slaves dying. And it usually took a few hours for them to die in the sun. And they died because their rib cages collapsed in on themselves because they were nailed to the cross. And they asphyxiated. So in this kind of a scenario, it was a good way for the Roman leadership to warn other slaves who might be walking that this was the consequence if you tried to rebel or escape. Then we get to Spartacus. And, if you've seen the TV show, it's not even in the neighborhood of being accurate. There's an old movie from the 50s or 60s, again, not very accurate, but it's a great kind of way to see the slave conditions in those days. Spartacus had been a Thracian governor. He was an important man, and he was enslaved when the Greeks were taken over and dominated by the Romans, and he eventually led 70,000 slaves in a revolt, and he fought the Roman army for 2 years before they were captured. The Romans, they did what they always do. They captured Spartacus and crucified 6,000 of his followers. So you can't get much more brutal than that. So when you think about the Romans crucifying Jesus, that was just another day for them. It wasn't as significant as it became in terms of the Christian religion. So the Republic begins to change. And you see this as 3 men become the leaders of Rome. Crassus, this guy, He's the richest man in Rome, and he had put down the rebellion by Spartacus, so he was a very popular guy. Pompey, he was the military leader of Spain, and he was seen as a hero. And then Julius Caesar, he was the military leader who took Gaul. And again, that's modern-day France. And he was the people's general. He had not been born rich. He had worked his way up through the system, and people looked at him as someone to aspire to. So these three men form what we call the First Triumvirate. In 60 BCE, they form this coalition of power, and their combined wealth and power made them the dominating force of the Roman Republic. Pompey took Spain, Crassus took Syria, and Caesar took Gaul, again modern-day France. And this is all working out really well until, of course, one of them dies. And that's Crassus. And in 53 BCE, Crassus is killed in battle. The Senate decides that Pompey should be given command over Rome and Caesar should step down. Because remember, Caesar was somebody who came from the middle class or the lower classes and worked his way up. Pompey was rich. Pompey was part of the aristocracy, so of course the Senate would go for him. Well, Caesar was totally not digging this at all. And he started his own civil war, and he defeated Pompey's forces in 47 BCE. In 45, Caesar was made dictator for life by the Senate. In 44 BCE, he was assassinated by the very same Senate on what we call the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. And essentially what happened was Caesar didn't give the Senate any choice. They had to make him dictator. But of course, the Senate was not happy about this. So they needed a few months to get together and figure out an assassination plot, which is what they did. And Caesar was killed. Now, when Caesar was killed, this left a void of leadership. And whenever there's a void, you know, somebody has to step up. Two men step up. The Roman world is divided into two parts. You have Octavian, who's over here. He is Caesar's grandnephew, and he takes the western part of the Roman Republic. Mark Antony was Caesar's protege, and he took the east, including Egypt, and that becomes a very significant part of this. Because Mark Antony had a girlfriend. His girlfriend was Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt. And when it came down to vying for power between the East and the West, between Octavian and Antony, instead of really relying so much on warfare, Octavian uses propaganda. And in this case, the propaganda works extremely well because he starts telling the people of Rome that Antony wants to give his whore, i.e. Cleopatra, the Roman Republic. This does not go over well with the Romans. It's kind of like if President Obama divorced Michelle and married Salma Hayek and said he was going to hook up with Mexico and help them out. Americans would not be happy about this. So, just briefly, this is a artistic representation of Cleopatra from that time period, a statue of Mark Antony. In the 1960s, there was a terrible movie made called Cleopatra with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. And the movie is not very good, but it's well known that that is where they met, fell in love, and ran away from their respective spouses and lived happily ever after for a couple years before they got divorced. And then they got remarried, and then they got divorced. They were kind of the Brad and Angelina of the 1960s. So this is all going to come down to the Battle of Actium. The Battle of Actium, right here. Okay, so remember, Egypt is down here, Rome is up here. So Actium is kind of sort of in the middle. In 31 BCE, Octavian smashes Antony and Cleopatra's army and navy, and they both flee to Egypt, where they both commit suicide the next year. The cool thing is that Cleopatra, never to just do something easy, kills herself by allowing a snake to bite her breast. This is one of those famous historical stories that is represented in a multitude of ways in in art, paintings, sculpture, etc. So, by age 32, Octavian becomes the sole ruler of Rome. It was the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. We're going to pick up next week with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire we divide into two separate, distinct eras: the rise of the Roman Empire and the decline of the Roman Empire. So we'll be discussing that in more detail. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to text or email me, and I hope you have a terrific day.